people, maybe thousands of people who are displaced, who have lost their livelihoods, who have lost their houses. Those are in need. And this stage of recovery, the needs are very basic: the food, sanitation, water and hygiene, and health. Once again, in that sense, I think this conference is very, very timely, very timely. During time period where those who are in need of nutritious, safe and affordable food. Even at this point, there are requests coming from areas like Kotmale and Gampola requesting for relief and basic items like food and water. Still the requests are coming. This I am aware because this I am proud to say also our own students are involved in coordinating the University of Students, especially the very especially for the Faculty of Arts. Even at this moment they are involved in coordinating the massive amount of relief that has come from the international community. So this is really valuable because this time period, coordination and communication is very important. And during a disaster, coordination and communication are the first thing to be lost. At the same time, there are so many people who are in need, especially when it comes to the basic needs like food. So in that case, I think we need to discuss all these areas because we need to move forward. How can we ensure food security for those in need? Especially during a disaster, it is usually those who are most vulnerable and those who are most underprivileged are the most affected. It's always the case. And it's no difference in this situation in Sri Lanka also. In that sense also, I believe, I hope this conference will shed light into those challenges that we are facing. And also once we are moving to the next phases of our recovery and rehabilitation, again the livelihood rehabilitation, ensuring food safety, developing agriculture practices, all these things comes into play. This calls for multidisciplinary involvement, interdisciplinary work, where the scientists, the legal profession, policymakers, agriculture scientists, all working together, and the industry coming together. So I believe this conference will be mainly focusing on the policy aspect and also the political aspect of it, which is also very important. So once again, I believe this is a very, very important conference, and I hope and I wish a fruitful discourse and dialogue that would provide practical solutions to the challenges that we are facing. Once again, I thank the University of Colombo and Thomson Rivers University for coming together for this very important collaboration, and I pledge my fullest support from the university, and we are looking forward to further collaboration and partnership. Thank you. Once again, wishing you all the very best.
Thank you very much, sir. So now it's time for us to move on to another important item of the agenda, the keynote address by Mr. David Mackinnon, the former Canadian High Commissioner to Sri Lanka. Before we move on to our keynote address for the day, it is my pleasure to once again invite Professor Robert Handlin to introduce the keynote speaker.
Thank you very much. And just before I introduce His Excellency, you'll notice how, extend a moment of gratefulness to not only, obviously, High Commissioner McKinnon, but the Government of Canada, which has been a part of this right from the beginning through its Indo-Pacific strategy. This conference would not have been possible without a funding grant from something called the Regional Connectivity Envelope, which is meant to enhance people connections. And so they're actually doing this. And this is a kind of a ground-breaking moment for us in Canada, where you have support for these kind of events, which had been absent for some time. So with that, having Ambassador and High Commissioner McKinnon here really speaks to that commitment, and so we're very grateful. But I do want to just take a moment to introduce His Excellency. So David McKinnon joined the Department of External Affairs as a Trade Commissioner in 1987. During his time in Ottawa, he served as a variety of positions related to the range of Canada's overseas trade, economic, diplomatic interests, including as Director of Asia-Pacific Policy 2002 to 2004. From 2013 to 17, he was Executive Director of Strategic Policy and Planning and then Director General of the Physical Resource Bureau. David's assignments overseas have included Bangkok, Canberra, and the latter as Deputy Head of Mission New Delhi, where he was a Minister Council responsible for delivering Canada's trade and investment programs in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. In 2024, as a High Commissioner, I should say, as 2024, he served as Chargé d'Affaires at the Embassy of Canada in Central Asia in Astana, Kazakhstan. David's background is in history and as an MBA, but just on a personal note, just again how grateful we are, because David is in somewhat a national treasure in speaking on South Asian history, and I know our colleagues in Canada, when you have a conversation with David, it is a wide-ranging discussion, and and I know I keep bugging him about this, but we're waiting for the book to come out of his on his analysis. But we're very fortunate to have him here. So can I please get a warm welcome for David McKinnon?
I decided to be environmentally conscious and not print out my speech, but I may regret that. But I've got it on my computer here. First off, thank you, Rob, very much for those kind words of introduction, and I'm happy to say that having left the Foreign Service and after my assignment here, 2022, I'm most definitely formerly excellent and no longer Ambassador or High Commissioner, so David is just fine. Yubowan, Vanakam, good morning, bonjour, friends and distinguished participants. It's, for me, a real pleasure to be back in Colombo and for this important conference on food security and Canada-Sri Lanka relations. I should emphasize at this stage that I do speak in my personal capacity. I'm not even for the Asia Pacific Foundation, where I'm a senior fellow, but very much in a personal capacity. And in no way am I speaking on behalf of the Government of Canada, although my comments obviously are based very much on what I learned in 5 exciting years here in Colombo. I want to thank the University of Colombo and Thompson Rivers University, particularly Professors Senanek and Hanlon for organizing this dialogue and for inviting me to offer some thoughts to set the stage. It's also great that this conference builds on a long history of collaboration between Sri Lanka and Canada in agriculture since 1948 or since the early 1950s. So there's a nice underlying continuity, especially as it falls on the heels of and Isabelle Martin, the current High Commissioner, mentioned this last night, on a agricultural technology mission in November that explored options for further collaboration. And as among other, as a guy who was an Indo-Pacific guy before the Indo-Pacific existed, every single one of my postings was on a country that had a coast on the Indian Ocean, and some of them on the Pacific. But I just want to say how glad I am that Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy is supporting events like this conference to strengthen academic and other non-government engagement with the region that is integral to global and Canadian prosperity and security. So it's really great, and I think that's what helped get me here too. Before turning to the bigger picture, I think, and there was a lovely acknowledgement of the impact of the cyclone just as we started, and I think that was wholly appropriate and beautifully done. But before turning to the bigger picture, let me take a moment to acknowledge that impact of the cyclone Ditma on Sri Lanka. And, you know, the images of destruction, flooding, the displacement of families, the losses suffered by farmers and communities came across the island were sobering. And having only just a couple of weeks ago actually been up in the Dumbura Valley visiting with my wife, who's got a passion for Sri Lankan craft and design, having been up in the Dumbura Valley visiting weavers there, and to know how cut off they became after the cyclone is really quite sobering in itself. The cyclone did not create Sri Lanka's food security challenges, but it has exposed and accelerated them, I think, especially for smallholder farmers and others already operating at the margin, notably in the estate sector and, importantly, among the urban poor. As we think of those who lost loved ones, livelihoods, and homes, it's worth recognizing the extraordinary work done by government, civil society, and communities in responding to the disaster in our time of already considerable strain. The response from the international community has also been welcome, and I certainly hope that it continues. Food security cannot be separated from climate resilience and geopolitical stability, or from the vulnerability of communities and institutions. And I think this disaster really has underscored that. The UNDP estimates that over 530,000 hectares of rice paddy lands have been inundated, with the damage occurring at the critical early stages of the Maha season. This will likely suppress domestic food availability well into 2026. So there's a long, long road ahead, and I'm hopeful that in its own small way, the discussions of this conference may contribute to that rebuilding or rethinking. Food security is not a new issue to Sri Lanka, or for that matter for Canada. Addressing it is taking on new importance, however, as natural and man-made crises expose weaknesses that frequently impact food security. Around the world, food insecurity is shifting from being seen as primarily a humanitarian issue to being recognized as a broader societal challenge with global dimensions. Climate shocks, supply chain disruptions, conflict, and global market volatility have shaped and are reshaping the conditions under which both farmers and policymakers must operate, and consumers for that matter. Sri Lanka and Canada are obviously very different in terms of geography, climate, population, and history, but both have seen how vulnerable food systems can become and how they can shape national stability, prosperity, and public trust. So that brings up the question as to why food security matters for both countries, I think. The World Food Programme flagged in 2024 that 16% of Sri Lankan households were moderately food insecure, with children in particular facing elevated risks of malnutrition. While this was a significant improvement from the depths of the economic crisis in 2022, it is still troubling, and it's chronic. I mean, this existed before the economic crisis in 2022. And these vulnerabilities have now been magnified by DITMA, and as the UNDP's excellent initial assessment of the impact is flagged. And in fact, for the Canadians, well, the Sri Lankans too, but I speak to the Canadians, if you want a really great example of the utility of the international system and of the UN, reading that UNDP report, it's just so well done and it's so timely, and the message that it delivers, it's hard to imagine another organization having been able to do something like that. At the same time, the longer-term challenges, including climate variability, environmental degradation, market concentration, high input costs, and logistical gaps between farm and market, continue to shape outcomes, both for farmers and consumers. Canada faces its own food security challenges, though very different in form. Even in one of the world's largest agricultural exporters, too many households struggle with affordability, access, and nutrition. The rising cost of living, exacerbated in marginalized and remote communities, has made food insecurity a national concern. In fact, according to Statistics Canada, the percentage of food insecure households in Canada is higher than the proportion measured here by the WFP, although I think the metrics are very different. But just as, the point is not to compare the suffering, but to remind ourselves that food security is not an issue specific to geography or level of development. It's a global issue shaped by climate, markets, governance, and politics. Both our countries are grasping with these pressures, each in its own way. However, understanding the challenges others face and the potential solutions they develop to address those challenges can help with the development of appropriate policies at home. I want to talk a little bit about Sri Lanka's physical and attitudinal geography, and what one I could say is leafy Colombo and the rest. Food security and other governance issues in Sri Lanka cannot be fully understood without understanding the long-standing gap between Colombo and much of the rest of the country, or indeed between the well-to-do and marginalized communities in and around Colombo itself. Every country has a center of gravity, but in my experience in Sri Lanka, the gap has been particularly important, playing out in the country's modern economic and political development, and indeed with armed conflicts. The political, social, linguistic, and economic divides are real and need to be top of mind. The casual visitor or expert, or diplomat for that matter, who ignores them will inevitably come away with a limited understanding of this complex and beautiful island. In Sri Lanka, as much as in other countries, outsiders may be able to help with the conversations to find solutions, but outsiders will never have the complete answers. And here, those outsiders may even be from Colombo. When around the time I arrived in Sri Lanka, I can't remember I heard this or I think I actually read it. Someone said, beware the barefoot perspective. And barefoot is, some of you may, well, the Sri Lankans will certainly know, and the Canadians may be familiar with it, is this wonderful cafe and accompanying shop not far from here. And I quickly add that it's in no way criticism of the extraordinary legacy of Barbara Sansoni and her son Dominic in the creative vitality of this country, and they're the ones who founded this. But the reference instead is the fact that on a Sunday afternoon, sitting in the beautiful garden cafe behind that iconic store of Sri Lankan craft, listening to jazz, enjoying great food, and the conviviality of a seemingly diverse local and international crowd, it's very hard to understand the challenges that exist not very far away. And so, as a guest in this country, as a foreigner living here, it was always important for me to remember that much as I loved going there, that there was a whole lot more to the country than that, that we need to remember. And a whole lot interesting to the country that's beyond there. Many communities beyond the leafy neighborhoods of Colombo face structural disadvantages in transport, market access, culture, language, and affordability. Smallholder farmers operate within systems that often reward intermediaries more than producers, while the poor face high food prices. Some of these divides have narrowed over time, but others remain entrenched. Understanding this duality is essential for designing successful policy and for understanding the different needs of different regions. Let me talk a little bit about innovation, and there was some mention of that earlier, but one of the things that has always fascinated me about Sri Lanka is it's long and not very well recognized, I think, and I'm a history nerd at heart, but it's got a history of innovation here. This is a country whose people built one of the world's most sophisticated ancient irrigation systems with cascading tanks and canals that modern engineers still admire. Indeed, the Canadian engineers building the Maduro Oya Dam in Polonnaruwa in the early 1980s discovered, when they began excavation, they discovered the remains of a 2,000-year-old dam on the very same site. And quite wonderfully, I think, they adjusted the design of the dam so that they could preserve the spillways. So if you go to Maduro Oya, you can actually, you see this modern dam that they marvel at the Canadian engineering and what was done there, but they also are very proud of the fact that you can see the remnants of, we weren't the first with the idea to put a dam there, and that it's very neat to understand that. And that again, that continuity. This is a place, this island produced sophisticated metallurgy a millennium ago of what became known as Damascus steel, harnessing local resources and climate and know-how to produce what was arguably the world's finest steel at the time. Fast forward to the modern era, and you see exceptional design and artistic creativity that arose from a blend of global influences and inspired local innovation. Sri Lanka has produced innovations more recently in fields as varied as architecture, design, apparel technology, nanotechnology, software, and financial services.